Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Theresa May heads to Brussels today after Prime Minister's questions to try and make progress on securing a Brexit deal. The signs aren't good. The EU is now saying there are no grounds for optimism. And Mrs May is boxed in at home as well, with Brexiteers in her party and the DUP both unhappy. Well, a short while ago, the Brexit Secretary Dominic Raab set off for what could be a crucial day for the government.
Morning, Mr Raab. Can Prime Minister secure a deal in Brussels today?
Absolutely right. We're negotiating in good faith and we'll keep our nerve.
Can Cabinet unity hold?
Meanwhile, three heavyweights from across the political spectrum have demanded a people's vote on any Brexit deal that Theresa May is able to secure. Former Prime Minister Tony Blair, former Deputy Prime Ministers Sir Nick Clegg and Michael Heseltine have written a joint letter to the European Union urging member states to give the UK more time so a people's vote can be held. Earlier today on Sky News, we spoke to Sir Nick Clegg.
They promised a utopia to those 17.4 million people and the country as a whole. They said that Brexit would be easy, it would be quick, it would be cost-free, it would produce pots of extra money for the NHS, it wouldn't do any damage to the economy, we would be able to effortlessly sign lots of new trade agreements around the world. And one thing we know, I think we can all agree on this, all sides of this continuously heated debate, is that every single one of the commitments made to the British people by the Brexiteers at the time of the referendum have turned out to be untrue. And I think, boy, do I know this. In politics, you get held to account. You say you're going to do things, you either do or you don't do them, and then people hold you to account. I think it's the Brexiteers who should be held to account for failing to deliver any of the promises they made to the British people. Clearly, they're making an utter hash of these negotiations, and that's why we feel, myself, Tony Blair, Michael Heseltine, who wrote this joint article today, but many others as well, feel that in the end, it should always be the people who are in charge, and that not a second vote, it should be a first vote on the real facts of the matter, because we didn't have all the facts of the matter available to us on the 23rd of June in 2016.
Well, with me now, our political correspondent, Tamara Cohen. Welcome to you. It does seem that much as Mrs May says, back me in my negotiations with the EU, that here at home, as we saw with Nick Clegg, wherever you are on the Brexit argument, she's not getting much support.
She's not getting much support, and expectations are now pretty low for this summit. This was, of course, supposed to be the crunch summit. All the expectation over the last 2 years are focused on October is when it all finally comes together, and it doesn't look like it is finally going to come together because, as Mrs May told Parliament on Monday, told her cabinet yesterday, we simply haven't got there on the Irish backstop. The EU want to hear creative solutions, a new plan, and she hasn't got one to put to them at the dinner tonight, at which she'll address EU leaders.
So do you have any idea what she's going to say?
Well, we think she's going to focus on, we haven't had the words briefed out yet, but we think she's going to focus on some of the progress they have made over the last couple of weeks in the negotiations and trying to just put forward the British position, which is that essentially she can't accept what they're putting forward, so there has to be movement on Northern Ireland, and in particular putting an end date in place. What's interesting that's come out overnight and into this morning is that there's now talk about extending Britain's transition period in the EU, which was supposed, effectively, we stay in the EU until the end of 2020, stay in all the arrangements. There's now talk of extending that by another year. Now, I spoke to a number 10 source this morning who says we are not trying to do that. That's not what we're calling for. Could potentially solve some of Mrs May's problems in terms of giving her more time to work on the Irish backstop. The problem is her party won't accept it. Another year of paying into the budget, accepting free movement, accepting the European Court of Justice. So she's very much under pressure to get this done. Hopes now focusing potentially on a deal being done at the December summit. But certainly, Prime Minister's questions today, I think some of her Brexiteers and the DUP could be making their discontent very clear. OK,
Tamara, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's go to our Europe correspondent, Mark Stone. He joins us from Brussels. And Mark, first of all, this idea of extending the transition period, that appears to be a olive branch coming from Brussels.
Yeah, but I have to say, Adam, they've talked about it before. I mean, I think plenty of people here in Brussels expected that at some point the transition period may have to be extended. And from their point of view, I don't really sense that there is any problem from an EU perspective on extending the transition period, not least because it means they get a lot more money, which is precisely the reason that many within the UK don't want to extend it. Don't forget that Mrs May wanted initially the transition period to be precisely 2 years. In effect, it's actually just under 2 years at the moment, because if it was to roll into 2021, then it would mean that Britain has to pay into the next 8-year multi-annual budget, which, if it is extended, Britain will have to do. From a British perspective and from a Brexiteer perspective, extending the transition is not good, because what it means is we are tied to this club, but we have no seat at the table for more than 2 years, which is clearly not a good idea. Increase the amount of time where Theresa May can try to achieve some sort of rich trade deal which would avoid having to have a border on the island of Ireland. But anything to the contrary yet. I think the likelihood, and it's impossible, well, it's not sensible to guess anything in these Brexit negotiations, but the likelihood is that tonight or tomorrow morning, the EU side will announce that there cannot be a November summit, an emergency summit in November. Why? Because there hasn't been any sort of agreement at this summit, so there's nothing to sign in November. But we shouldn't read that as being a disaster. What we should read that as being is the fact that they've created more time for more negotiations, not here in the Council, but over there in the Commission. They excuse me, have magicked up more time because everyone wants to make sure there is a deal and that there isn't this cliff edge.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's get the thoughts now of the German member of the European Parliament, Hans-Olaf Henkel. He's a member of the Liberal Conservative Reformers, part of the European Conservative and Reformist group. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, Mr Henkel. Do you think we are heading towards no deal?
Well, of course, it is not unlikely, but I must agree with the previous speaker. There is an olive branch sent by the European Commission. However, I think they should give a real olive branch. In my view, Brexit is a disaster not only for the UK, it is also a disaster for Europe. And I must agree with Hazeltine and Nick Clegg and John Major and Tony Blair and others who think that they should offer this particular deal to the British public for a decision. On the other hand, I think that the European Commission should also change its own position, because they were partly to blame for Brexit in the first place. Had they given Britain or Cameron at that time more autonomy over its immigration, the Brexit wouldn't have taken place in the first place. So my suggestion is that the Commission stops linking trade always to freedom of movement, offers Britain a new deal, and then give Britain a chance to rethink that decision.
You see, one of the problems here, as you know, is this whole question of the Irish backstop. And what British Conservatives are saying is, we thought we'd agreed this in December, but the way in which the European Union has chosen to interpret that backstop was not what we thought we'd agreed to, which means that as we approach the decisive agreement, it's really got to be spelt out a lot more clearly than it is now, because otherwise the European Union might use the backstop as a way of coming back for more.
Well, I think you're right in your assumption or your observation that the European Union is behaving unreasonably at times, and I think sometimes very arrogantly. In this particular case, however, I don't see any real solution. Either you have a border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and then, of course, no common market, or you don't have one, but then you do need a common market or customs union. So I think there is logically no other solution. Yesterday, President Tusk talked about a Gordian knot. And he is right. And I appeal to Mr. Tusk that he should behave like Alexander the Great. He should cut this Gordian knot. He should step over his own shadow and offer Britain now a different solution when it comes to freedom of movement. This is either good for a better deal under the assumption of Brexit, but it would also be good in case Britain changes its mind, because even the Brexiteers could then say, okay, we got what we always wanted without the disadvantages of Brexit.
But why not just say, look, we appreciate governments change, nothing can be forever. We can't have a backstop that is theoretically open forever, that the backstop would apply until the end of the transition period, for example, because this is, you know, a real problem for not just Mrs. May, but also for the Irish Democratic Unionists who are supporting her.
I have a lot of sympathy for that, but I must say, and then what after 2 years? That's why I think extending that period by another year doesn't really help. What would help is that right now, if there was no deal by tomorrow or in the next few weeks, that the European Union offers Britain more time to negotiate. So in other words, don't take this date of March 29, 2019 too serious. Give a little bit more time to come up with a deal. But at the same time, I think we should, in parallel, sorry?
Actually delay Article 50.
And don't forget, delay Article 50, yes, exactly. By a few months, I think that will be better than no Brexit, because no Brexit is a total disaster for both Britain and, by the way, also for the European Union. This is very often forgotten here, that Britain is very important to the European Union. After Brexit, Britain would be the European Union's largest customer, ahead of the United States, ahead of China. Britain leaving is, in terms of quantity, in terms of GNP, as if 19 countries of the EU would leave at the same time. So it's time also for Brussels to be more moderate vis-à-vis Britain, and they should try to do two things. Either make it possible that we have a reasonable deal which also satisfies British industry, and then it will also satisfy the European industry, or make a deal possible for Britain which enables the Remainers to get some more momentum for their own desire to have another referendum in Britain, because a democracy which can't change its mind if the facts have changed and the situation has changed ceases to be a democracy.
But you see, the problem with that approach is, it seems to me that we will only have a second referendum in the event of a deal not being agreed. If a deal's agreed, there won't be the political momentum, conceivably, in Britain to have a second referendum.
Well, of course, that's for the British to decide for themselves, but from a, let's say, continental experience, we have ample examples. The Danish, for instance, voted 3 times. And when the French rejected the Lisbon Treaty was changed, and then the French accepted it. So you cannot say we will ask the British voters the same question until they get the right answer. The same question makes sense if the assumption has changed. So if the Brexiteers got at the end what they always wanted, for instance, more autonomy over their own immigration, then they could easily say, okay, well, under these conditions, we would like to stay in the European Union. And let's not forget, many other countries in Europe, in the meantime, also agree with Britain's position on more autonomy of immigration. It's not only Poland and Hungary, it is also Denmark and Sweden and a large portion of Germany. So I would say it is worthwhile avoiding this major catastrophe. And I'm really disappointed that there is no statesperson, neither in Britain nor on the continent, which steps back and says, look, folks, let's take another measure, let's look where we are, and let's start from scratch.
Okay, Hans-Olaf Henkel, thank you very much indeed, a voice of reason there from the European Parliament.